Welcome to The Good Pod, where today we're talking about The Good Wife, Season 1, Episode 10, Lifeguard. I am one of your hosts, Jason Reed. With me, the hydrogen to my spaghetti, it's Marissa Garza. Marissa, you good?
I'm good. Yeah, that's a pretty apt comparison there in that situation.
Yeah, it's definitely like two very different things, but you can see them fitting together, which is kind of like a Carrie and Kalinda thing. Like, you're very different people, but you got some chemistry, you got some spark there. The way you guys work together. So it was a very fun comparison by Kalinda that it was very fun.
And of course, Carrie is still trying to make things happen there, which.
Listen, the guy, you gotta commend him on his stick-to-itiveness, is trying to get. I don't even know if he really likes Kalinda or it's just a mystery that he just wants to solve. Like, I don't even know what his motivations are here.
Yes. What do you think of this episode, Jason?
I thought it was good. I thought it was very layered. It was very complex. There were a lot of different mysteries to solve as we were going through. So I thought it was a really, really good episode. What did you think?
I also thought it was a good episode. It was one of the episodes that I remembered from watching The Good Wife the first time. It was the first, I think this is the episode where I learned about private prisons. This is just how suburbanite white Mexican I am. I just did not understand that was a thing until I was like, oh, that's happening.
This might be the one where I learned that judges were elected and they weren't just I don't know, randomly they didn't randomly just go, I want to be a judge now. They're like, okay, you can be a judge. I was like, oh, so that's how judges are selected. That's there's a whole political thing behind judges, because you don't really think about that until you're presented with something like this. Like, oh, well, that's how judges become judges. Interesting. Yeah. So a lot of things we're learning from The Good Wife, these episodes about the legal system.
This episode in particular, quite relevant to our timeline in 2024. In terms.
For sure. Before we get into everything about this episode, we want to remind you guys how you can help this podcast out for some easy, free ways. If you like the show, don't forget to review, to rate, and to subscribe. No matter which way you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, you can review and rate us. We've gotten a couple 5-star ratings from Apple Podcasts, so we thank those people very much for leaving us 5-star reviews. We're still at a perfect score of 5, so if you want to keep us going, hit that 5-star button and let us know how you're feeling about the show through a written review. If you do write us a review, we will read it on the podcast. Of course, if you're on Spotify, you can only rate. You cannot review, unfortunately. You can also leave us comments on Spotify, which is an interesting new little feature wrinkle. So if you have questions you want us to answer, you can leave that as well. And on those platforms, don't forget to subscribe as well. Follow the show so you'll know every time we have a new episode coming out. If you're watching this on YouTube, first of all, hey, how you doing? If you want to just hit that thumbs up button down there to let us know you're doing good, that you like the podcast, other people will get the podcast in their feeds. If you want to email us any comments, feedback, whatever, you can email us at thegoodpodfeedback@gmail.com. We thank you for all the ways you can help this podcast become more of a widely known podcast. Listen, we are a niche podcast, right? Not too many people are out there looking for The Good Wife rewatch podcast, but we want to make sure that if they're looking for it, that they can find us. So if you would love to help us get into more eyes, we would really, really appreciate it. Marissa, let's get into the episode. Let's break it down.
All right, we got a lot to cover. So in the case of the week, this was a case where Alicia was assigned to help the son of the housekeeper of the most important client.
the son of the housekeeper of the important client. It was a very layered type of thing. But listen, I was very impressed that I was going to call her Felicia. Bye, Felicia. That Alicia was kind of on her own here. She was allowed to just kind of go there and try the case herself. It may have been it was probably just hey, this is kind of a small potatoes thing. Just go ahead and do it yourself. But I was impressed that she was allowed to just kind of go out and settle this for the firm. No supervision, no second chair. It was just her by herself.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what the firm thought it was going to be, because we see at the beginning she's negotiating with Counselor Mark Richardson, who I recognized from Mad Men. He played Kinsey on Mad Men, but he was definitely one of those people where I was like, oh, I know you. Where do I know you from? But they're just negotiating.
Yeah, he was very...
Yeah.
Yeah, he was very like, I wasn't a Madman watcher, but I have seen him somewhere, probably in a very bit role. But he's got one of those faces, as we talk about all the time. The show is just full of those. I know that guy face, but yeah, he definitely was apparently a big presence on Mad Men. As I said, I never watched that show.
He was a little quirky. But they're like just talking about like what can they get to on this and kind of just like push it away. We don't really find out what the crime is until like later on in the story, but it sounds like it's just like a simple assault. And even though like this kid is young, even while they're like negotiating this and asking, like Alicia has to go back and ask the kid, like, are you okay saying that you did this in open court? And he's like, yeah, I am sorry. And his mom's like, yo, this is gonna get her or get him a criminal record. Like this is not just as simple as saying I'm sorry. It is a pretty heavy
I
thing
think
for this kid to deal with.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we're in a position where we feel sorry for this kid, right? He was a nerd that got picked on by the bully. He was threatened, so he got scared and like tried to defend himself, which ended up with the bully having some like semi-serious, medical issues, like he had to get stitches. I think his
Broken
eyesight was broken or
nose.
something.
Yeah.
But it's not like this was a kid that was overly aggressive or was a bad kid. We're supposed to be feeling really bad for this kid, like, oh, this poor little kid tried to defend himself, and he was just trying to defend himself, and ended up hurting this kid. So I for the story's purposes, it's good that we felt bad for the
Yes.
kid, so that we could feel outraged later at what
Well, and
happens.
it starts pretty early because we walk into the courtroom and we see our good friend Tony Goldwyn from everything, from Scandal, from Law and Order now, from everything.
Yeah, I know him. Like I watched the original Recipe Law and Order, which is what he's on now, and he plays the DA on that show. The DA's name is Nicholas Baxter on that show. So I was like, when I looked up Tony Goldwyn, of course I know where he's from, but like, to get the particulars, like, wait a minute, his character's name here is Baxter, the character there is Baxter. Is this gonna like some crossover? Is this going to be like, is this the good twin brother of the evil twin brother? Like, what is the story here? Why are both these people named Baxter? It's just my conspiracy mind working
I
overtime.
really hope it was like the Law and Order people giving a nod to the good team, the good wife people, because that would be fun. But I see him and I'm like, oh, it's Tony Goldwyn. And then he starts talking and I'm like, oh, I do not like you one bit. He basically is, first of all, calling people up to the dais like as contestants. Like, who's our next contestant? Like, what is
Mhm.
this fun for you, dude? Like, this is jail. This is life and death for
It's
some
not a game.
people, and especially he's in juvenile court. So he's like making fun of this and trying to be like the cool guy talking to the bailiff and all this stuff. And he comes down and he says, "Yeah, I know you made a deal, but I can impose a harsher sentence. Do you really think that the punishment for like breaking a nose should just be picking up trash?" And I was like, "Yeah, I really do."
Yeah, I, we kind of went on a wild journey with Tony Goldwyn here, because when I see someone like a Tony Goldwyn come on this show, because so far our track record has been, you get the kind of dreamy guest star, and Alicia's going to flirt with him a little bit. They're going to have kind of a chemistry thing, but it's just like, and so when I first saw, I was like, okay, this is going to be that type of thing. But then he starts getting like really dumb, as you said, the whole contestant thing, and he's throwing the book at this young kid. I'm like, oh, okay, so this isn't going to be like this guy's the charming guest star of the week. He's going to be our big bad of the episode. And it only gets way worse from here.
Yeah. Yeah. Afterwards, Alicia is like, "What happened? We had a deal before we walked in here. Like, this is not what should happen." So she goes and approaches the DA and is like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's like, "Hey, on the down low, like people are complaining about this judge. So if you want to pursue this, if you want to do anything, talk to legal aid because they have some information for you." Which I thought was
Yeah, and of
interesting.
course Alicia is always seeming to be in this kind of position of having to be the one person that will step in and look into this more than
Yes.
other people, which I think Alicia's been put in this position a lot in these first 10 episodes of like, Alicia, you are the one that really cares enough to really look into this even further, because other people, apparently this has been happening a lot, but everyone's just kind of overlooking it and being like, oh well, oh well, we're just kind of go with the flow. But Alicia's like, no, this stops here. It stops with me. So I mean, I find it funny that Alicia's always painted in this like angelic light of like she's the one that will save the people that no one else cared about.
She is the people's lawyer, you know, like she's for the people.
Mm-hmm.
So legal aid comes over, brings a bunch of documents, and basically says, like, these are the people that Baxter has sentenced. This is how they sentence. Like, look into it for yourself. Carrie is like, okay, cool. I'm going to take this on because I love patterns and figuring out patterns
Mm-hmm.
and statistics and stuff, which I didn't know about him until this very moment.
I think Carrie is in the wrong job. I honestly really do, because as we've seen up to this point, he hasn't done a lot of the courtroom law stuff. He's been a great
Yes,
negotiator, and we see here that he's a great stats guy. I think he should be in like analytics or something, maybe advising, like based on statistics. That's what you should be asking for. I think that is what Carrie should be into, rather than law, because we haven't really seen him kick ass in the courtroom yet
right.
in these first 10 episodes, but he's really been a big like in the weeds guy. Like he's been doing the research, he's got the stats. He's really a analytical person.
Yeah, and which is what I think plays with the chemistry with Kalinda a little bit is like,
Mhm.
I also like to do what you're doing. So I'm going to hang out with you and try to get to know you. But after they look through all the legal aid stuff, they bring in the lawyer who's attached to Schiffer Marks, which is their largest client, who is the client housekeeper son
Yeah.
relationship
Yep.
in this situation.
Yeah.
And it turns out that they never mention his name, but we know this character because we've watched The Good Wife and The Good Fight all the way through. But we get our first look at Julius, the lawyer who is on the Schiffer Marks case at the law firm. It was good to see him. I was like, oh, you're so young. Look at you.
Yeah. And the thing is, like he never gets named in this
No.
episode. Like they never even mention his name. They never say the word Julius Kane. They never say that word. He's just there. And like you said, for us who have gone through this franchise, all the iterations of this franchise, we Julius plays a pretty good role in the back end of the Good Wife and a lot of the Good Fight for sure. He's all over that show. So I just have to wonder if this is a case of like, this is our first case of like something that has to do with a racial bias or a racial
Mm.
component of the case. But I do wonder if they just looked around like, okay, who are we going to get to talk about the racism of we don't have any black people around here. Or we're looking at the cast list like, oh, we probably need to get a black person in here to talk. Just talk about the black stuff in the room. Like, who can we get? And they get Michael Boatman, who, for me, the big thing I know him from is Spin
Hmm.
City. He was a big part of that show. He was also on China Beach
Oh,
back in the day. When
throwback.
we were talking pre-show. Marissa says I wasn't
I
allowed
was
to watch
not.
China Beach as a child. I was like,
Yeah.
okay. Also of Arliss fame, I never watched Arliss. I knew of
Oh,
Arliss,
this
never
is good.
watched it. But like I said, for me, this is the guy from Spin City who had the suicidal dog.
Yes.
Ags, I think his name was. I loved him on that show, but yeah, it's our first sighting of Julius, and it was big. I didn't check the credits. I would be wondering what the credits said about who this person was. Is his name here in the credits of the show? I know his name's probably here in the Wikipedia, the IMDb, but that's probably after the
Right.
fact of when he was a big part of the show. I do wonder inside the show what was he credited as? Did they even give him a name, or was he just like other law other lawyer in the case? Like it was so interesting to see how they introduced Julius here. It felt like this guy's gonna be here for one episode and then we'll be done with
Yeah.
him. But then they were just like, you know what? He did a really good job. Let's keep bringing him back on a recurring basis. And then it just kind of ballooned from
Yeah,
there.
it definitely did feel like a, hey, let's see how this works. Let's see how this happens. And I think
Mhm,
like this is like the first episode, not the first like let's teach the audience something episode, but it's like the first
mhm,
like really long storyline that kind of deals with this. And so like they're bringing like it's folded into the Schiffer Marks, which has been like brought up over and over and over and over again.
yeah.
And so there's also the racial component to it. So he's like brought in a way where he could kind of be in or out. It was a very smart, move for the show to make.
Yeah.
But it's just so interesting,
I
like
just I
knowing,
just
like the first time we watched this, like I probably was just like, oh, it's a dude. And now I'm like, oh my gosh. You're
Mhm.
like, and also
Well,
like
that's
the
the fun.
context of this episode, knowing what happens to the Julius character throughout the story within the good universe. It's very weird. It's very kismet, and I we'll talk about it when we get to it. But it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that the fact that we're dealing with all these issues of race, and like I said, this is in the first 10 episodes. This is probably the second or third time we're dealing with a case that has to do with a racial component. And I just think, I
You're
wonder
right.
what it was like inside the writer's room, inside the kid. Like, well, you know what? Like, we're talking about a lot of race stuff. Like we don't have any black lawyers in this show. So, like, what, is that an oversight on our part? I don't know. And this show, for those that, you know, for whatever reason haven't watched all The Good Wife and Good Fight like us, this show dives pretty heavily into those themes way further down the line. So I think this is the start of them realizing, like, hey, this is a chance for us to talk about some deeper stuff, and maybe we should incorporate some more of those actors in our repertoire
Yeah.
to talk about those things. So I just thought it was such an interesting thing to observe. And we're talking about the time of this episode. We're in 2009, 2008 when this episode comes out, and to see where this show and this franchise evolves and blooms to is such a fascinating case.
Yeah. Well, and even in this conversation, it's brought up that, Judge Baxter's a liberal, and so he
Mhm.
can't be racist. Obviously, like Julius is like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Like liberals can't be racist? We
And
know.
then Kalinda,
Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, and then Kalinda just, of course, as she does, just kind of walks in and states plainly, "Oh, he's a racist," and just walks out the door. Like, okay, cool. Kalinda's always going to tell you like it
But
is.
I enjoy the fact that this show brings in the nuances of the conversations that people are having off screen, like off screen in real life, because that is a conversation. 2008, Obama's running for president. Obama is, in the news. These are things that are being talked about
Obama gets name checked. He
as,
gets name checked in this
yeah,
episode.
yeah. So, I really always appreciate when the show does things like that, and it does it again a little bit later when it's just talking about not just race, but like the context and the nuance around having conversations about race as well. So we see Julius, we're introduced to Julius, which is great. And then Carrie, in his I researched everything in my life, tells Alicia, like, hey, I would not go to Will with it for this. Like, if because they walk out like trying to decide, we have to find a pattern to see what's going on and draw up like they want to like resubmit the case because of bias. And so Carrie's like, hey, don't go to Will about this because he's BFFs with Baxter. Didn't you look up all of the partners before you started like I did? And she's like, yeah, huh? Mm-hmm.
And of course, in that Carrie just this asshole always like, didn't you look up the other lawyers before you came here, Alicia? Like, that's what I did. I mean, because I'm Carrie, I'm Stat Boy, I'm Brown Noser, so I looked up every single lawyer that's in. Like, I kind of love the characterization of Carrie, just the uber prepared brown noser. He's prepared to brown nose anyone. And he knows what all the lawyers like to eat for lunch. He knows the kind
Yeah.
of music I like to listen to. I just love that piece of Carrie's character, that he's just this ultimate brown noser.
Yes. Yeah. And I like is consistent with it. Like he's
Yes, very
not
much so.
ashamed of it in any way, shape, or form. So instead of going to Will, Alicia goes to Diane. And we'll talk about like what else is going on with Diane in this episode in a minute. But Diane gives Alicia some like really great advice here and says, instead of making it just about Baxter, like let's talk about bias and sentencing as a whole within the system and just make it a bigger, larger conversation. And she takes that advice and submits it to the court. And it does not go over well.
I mean, there's a lot of fallout from this thing being pointed out by Alicia, and we'll talk about it as it goes along. But there's in multiple arenas there's
Yeah.
fallout that happens here.
Yeah, because it brings the attention in front of Diane. Diane is being courted to be a judge in Cook County at this point. And so she's also like coming to this with a new lens of point of view, and a new way of also like putting herself in a very awkward mentoring position with Alicia, because all of a sudden, Alicia, you're doing such a great job. Like, if I haven't said
Well,
it
I don't know if
enough,
it was.
like, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, because as we do, we're going to talk about the parallel storylines. But at this point in the story, chronologically, Diane has been
Yep.
approached about becoming a judge. And I think Diane's kind of like on a high. She might also think that she's like getting ready to leave the firm. She's like, Alicia, before I
Yes.
leave and become a judge,
Yes.
I just want to tell you, I just think you actually did such a great job here. Like, you're doing good. It's not. I think she's kind of shaken out of that whole like Carrie's my person and Alicia's Will's person. She's like, you know, such a great job. And I think she's also been told about how, she's been confronted by this committee and they talk about all the great things she's doing. You shared a glass ceiling. So she's like, oh, yeah. I did kind of look at Alicia as kind of like not my person, but I was reminded that I'm the person that shares a glass ceiling. So let me approach this other woman and tell her she's doing a great job. It was such an interesting reaction to it, I think, Diane. And this is kind of Diane's coming out party, I think, in terms of The Good Wife. This was the most Diane centric episode I think we've gotten in the first season. So this is really her, like, our introduction to Diane and kind of also what makes her tick a little bit.
Yeah, and at the same time, she's had a conversation with Will about like, hey, I've been approached for a judge role, and that means I would leave the firm. You'll protect my people, right? And so he's like, well, what would you do in my situation? Like, I could promise you, but like, I can't do that. And so I think this plays in the conversation that Diane is having with Alicia right now, because she's like, well, I better be nice to Alicia because then maybe Will be nice to Carrie when I leave. So there's a lot at play in this moment. And Kalinda and Carrie find out that there is a pattern in terms of Judge Baxter's sentencings. It happens in June of 2008. And so Alicia writes up a report, sends it to court. Judge Baxter reads it. He's like, I see what you're trying to do. Like, I don't like it. So I'm going to call you into my office. And this was like the most white man liberal response. I could not. I was so excited that it was like so textbook, because it was, first of all, it
Yeah.
was like, hey, I'm cool, you want some birthday cake? It's not even mine, but all right. And then
It was for a court reporter. I was surprised he didn't go like, "Who's black,
yeah,
by the way?"
exactly.
I
Well, it was
I
chocolate
sprang
cake.
for that
It
birthday
was
cake.
chocolate cake.
Yeah. Yeah, look at chocolate cake, right? Like that. See, I love all things black and brown. And he's like, he's got the pictures of all the, I'm sure from like an African mission trip he
Yeah.
may have went to or
Yeah.
something. He's got pictures with Barack Obama. Like it's as if 30 minutes before Alicia came into his office, he's like, all right, let me put up all my black pictures. He's like, see, I have black friends. I can't be racist. I know black people. Like I said, it's the most textbook thing you could ever think of. Now, in my mind, when I'm going through this episode, I'm just like, okay, they introduced the race angle very, very fast into the show, into the
Mm-hmm.
episode. So like it can't be that simple, right? It's gotta be something else
Right.
going on here. Me thinking with my like TV viewer's brain of 30 plus years, I'm just like, it can't be that easy. Now at this point, I was beginning to think like, well, maybe it's a white savior thing, right?
Mm.
He thinks by sending these black youths to detention centers, to juvenile centers, that he thinks that he's actually doing right by these people by rehabilitating them and sending them to some place where they can be safe, quote unquote, and learn life skills. I think that that's something that could have been a part of the story, but as we'll find out later, it's even deeper than that. So I was in that mindset right there. I was like, maybe he thinks he's doing right by these black men by sending them to to the detention center. So that's where my mind was at the
Yeah,
moment.
it could have definitely gone that way. But he also really threatens Alicia. He's like, well,
Yeah.
first of all, I don't like to be threatened, but you're gonna make this go away. And it was
Oof.
like, you are not a good person.
That's what I was like. Oh, that's what I was like. Oh, so it's even deeper than what I'm thinking. There's something more going on here.
Yeah, and we see Will plays basketball with the judges. It's something that he like is pretty prominent in the series overall. But this, I think, is the first time we're seeing it. I can't remember if we've seen him
I
play before. Maybe one time.
No, I think this is the first time, but I feel this. I think this is very weird, and yeah, I think, and as you're saying that, I do think this is the thing that's going to come up
Mhm.
again in the future. I just think it's kind of weird for lawyers and judges to be in a social standing like this together. I would feel like it would really make people question, the ethics of like, is it really cool for judges to be palling around with lawyers that may come before them in court? And we'll kind of see why that could be a hindrance at some point. I'm just surprised it's something that is allowed to happen out there in the real world. Which is very
Well, I
interesting.
feel like it's very like Chicago stereotypy. Like this is like the type
Mm,
of like everybody knows someone, there's a favor here, there's a favor there, like you have to like get to know somebody, and I think it's served
yeah.
well in certain cases, but in here I'm glad it didn't go a different way in this case, but I'm sure we'll see how.
Mm.
I can't remember how it comes into play, but it's definitely something that continues on throughout the series and might get him into some deep water going on. But right now, it's just Baxter basically saying, "Are you sleeping with Alicia? Get this case off my get this case out of the
I
way."
That was so interesting because Baxter kind of, messes with Will. Is like, so you sleeping with her or what? Because Will is very complimentary of Alicia. He's like, yeah, she just wants to do the right thing. He's like, oh, and and Baxter's like, oh, she wants to do the right thing. That we usually get someone thrown out of your law firm. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And Will is just kind of mum about it. And Baxter's like, so are you sleeping with her? And Will never outright says, no, I would never do that. He's just kind of quiet. He's just like, I mean, kind of
I
want to,
mean,
but like,
yeah.
you know, can't say that to you. He's like, oh, you hoping her husband loses his appeal? It's like, no. Let me just go out here and just throw some baskets around. I want to stop talking about this now because I definitely can be incriminating myself at any moment.
In more ways than one.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was an interesting basketball thing, which will come into play later in the episode as well. Kalinda finds out through an old coworker who is named
Well, in the show, he's named
he's
Frank.
Frank.
In
Yeah.
in real life, he's Dash Mihawk, who I know him from Ray Donovan, Bunchy from Ray Donovan, who was quite an interesting character on that show. So that was my, as we call him around here, my Leonardo DiCaprio moment of pointing at the screen and like, oh my god, that's that
Well,
guy. That's Bunchy
speaking
from Ray
of
Donovan.
Leonardo DiCaprio, like I know him from Romeo plus Juliet, the of Leonardo DiCaprio version of Romeo and Juliet. I was like, it's Benvolio. Oh my goodness. So he was hanging out randomly in this house. Like
I
it was
I
so
wasn't
random.
on the Romeo plus Juliet front. I wasn't an emo teenage girl in
Really,
2000, so
Jason.
I didn't watch
I'm so
I didn't
surprised.
watch that remake.
I'm so surprised.
Wasn't big on my watch list.
Well, Frank's just hanging out in this house, and Kalinda,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's very weird. It's Baxter's old house, and that's for some reason it was the setting they chose to meet up
like
at. It's like, why did we need to go to the
they could
house?
have had this conversation at a coffee shop or something. Like it wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But Frank's hanging out. It's really dark. Whatever. Carrie's along for the ride, trying to learn more. But they find out that there was a burglary and an attack on Baxter's wife in the summer of 2008, and that is like that coincides with the time when the pattern started showing up and how Baxter was sentencing things. And it was interesting because Frank was saying, "Oh no, we had a suspect and we went after that person, but Baxter called and had the charges dropped the next day, even though there was like signs of abuse on his wife and all of this other stuff. So it's quite suspect at this point in terms of what Baxter's motive was. Pe- we'll find out later, but right now it's just kind of like, oh, interesting. You drop the charges even though your wife was injured. You're even more of a jerk than I thought you were. You know what I mean? It's like it's just piling on how much of a jerk this guy is.
Well, it went back to my theory of like maybe he's trying to help these black men. Like he doesn't want other black people to end up like this guy who's breaking into houses and assaulting people. So he's gonna fix the black men of America by sending them to this rehabilitation place. So my mind was just reeling at the possibilities at the moment. I was like, that's definitely a new wrinkle to the story. So it was a very interesting story to keep following. I was like, oh, another piece of the puzzle falling into place here.
Yes. Diane is having conversations with the Chief Justice who's involved in her judge talk of it all. And this is where, because of her involvement in this case and knowing Terrence, and kind of, I think being asked to become a judge is getting Diane to kind of think about herself and her career and what she wants to do and the impact she wants to make on the system and all of that. And so while she's going over her electability with the Chief Justice and members of the Illinois DNC, she talks to the Chief Justice about this case that's going on with Baxter, and it is not received well by the Chief Justice. Like, I really think Diane was kind of going to be like, hey, so like you can help me out with this and everything. And the response was, oh, no, 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 no. You can help me out with this by making this go away, because then you're proving that you want this job.
Yeah, I mean, because the conversation that Diane has with the Chief Justice in, at the beginning of the Diane storyline makes it seem like the Chief Justice is all about doing the right
Yeah.
thing, wanting to stand up for the right people. But when push comes to shove and Diane asks for the right thing to be done, the Chief Justice really wants to move along party lines and not want to do the quote unquote right thing. So it's a very eye opening experience for Diane when the Chief Justice says, can't you just like play ball? Like, you want to be a judge, and judges have to protect each other. So that's more important than, as she says, one kid in jail. Like, why are you trying to fight this over just one kid being sentenced
Yeah,
harshly?
that was
And it's like, wow, that was
that
outrageous thing to
that
hear.
was like, don't, and it was done in so many metaphors. And Diane makes this point later on as she's talking to the Chief Justice, like, you have metaphors for everything, because one of the things she said was like,
You love water
yeah,
metaphors.
like, but this was, don't turn over the apple cart for one kid. And it's like, but what
Yeah,
is that? Like, why wouldn't I turn over the apple cart?
right.
Is my
That's what we should be
reaction.
doing.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I thought this what this whole system was about, is like turning over apple carts all of the time.
Yeah, but it's this Chief Justice just basically makes it, a way to, we have to protect our own. We have to, just do what we have to do for each other and not for the disenfranchised people of, of the Chicago in this instance.
Yeah. Yeah. It turns out that Will's playing basketball with the judges did not work in his favor. He's like, I have no idea what case this is, but he's in front of a judge and he had to ask for a continuance, and the continuance gets denied. It was a judge that was playing basketball with Will earlier in the episode. And so Will finds out that this is all connected and goes back, and he's like super mad at Diane. It's like, why are you doing this? And he says something that I think was like very prolific in 24, like looking backwards from 2024. He says anyone can fight City Hall, but they can't fight judges. And as a woman who has lost rights under
Hmm.
judges, I just could not
Yeah.
sit there, and I mean, many people have lost rights under judges in the current. I thought that that was a line that stood out to me now that I'm not sure would have stood out to me in 2008, you know?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about judges who have, lifetime appointments that are making decisions for people, they seem to be the biggest law in the land, and making decisions for people that they have really, depending on your opinion, should have no right to choose for. It was a very interesting thing to look at. Now, in this case, they're talking about judges at their level, and we're like making that into a judge on a whole higher level. It, like you said, is a interesting thing to look at in the year 2024. And from the year 2008 to 2024 is a lot has happened.
Yeah. But a lot has apparently stayed the same. So Carrie's continuing his investigation. He finds that there is a pattern, but it is not connected to race. Like, he can't figure out what it is. And so Kalinda, being the investigator that she is like, all right, screw this. Like, I'm tired of tiptoeing around Will. I'm just going to go straight to Will and ask what is going on with Baxter, especially around this time. And Will, first of all, like, doesn't really want to hear it. He's like, no, like, I'm not gonna do this. But he later tells Kalinda that Baxter was a gambler and he owed money to some people, and he finds out, well,
Uh,
and then he finds the pattern, which I'm like, Carrie, of all of the things to like not pay attention
you
to,
couldn't see that.
like, you could not see that all these kids were being sent to Palgrave Academy, to the same detention center. Like, that, it took Will to look at that. But anyway,
Yeah,
we
that
had a
was
couple of
weird.
things
Let's
going
talk
on
about
there.
Will though. Will is like, I mean, Baxter borrowed like some paltry sum of money. Like I don't remember. Like what was it? It was like not much. It's like 120,000. Like 120. You mean $120? She's like, no, 120,000. I'm like, and you don't think that's a big deal, Will? Like, like it just shows where Will is at in his life. He's like, this is 120,000. Pay you back whatever you want. He pay you back some of it. Not a big deal. I was like, all right, like I've said before, I got to figure out how to become a lawyer in Chicago and make that amount of money. Where 120 grand is just like no biggie. Like, go ahead, just take it. Pay you back. We can pay you back. I'm not worried about it. It's just 120 grand. That's it. Like, oh, okay, Will. We're big balling like that. Hey, Will Gardner. All right, cool.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yes, and Will takes one look at these pages and he's like, oh, it's Palgrave Academy. Like that was simple. That was easy. Like I said, Carrie, just you couldn't do that one, Carrie. Like
no, he was like
it was.
too distracted, and that might speak to like the fact that Carrie can be way too in the weeds and not see the obvious thing in front of him, because it just took Will like flipping the pages and seeing things. Will and Kalinda decide to go to Palgrave Academy and find out, like what's going on. And it was kind of like the first time we saw Will outside of the courtroom, like doing something that wasn't schmoozing, that wasn't like managing the law firm. It was like him on the case, and he had a really strong confrontation with the people there.
Yeah, this is a very feisty Will. He's about to fight this guy for giving kickbacks to Baxter. It's a very passionate, very feisty version of Will here. I think Will's mad because he's also realizing that his friend is dirty right now. Like this is him realizing what the real tea is, what the real case of this is.
He finds out that the runner, the person in charge of the academy, his wife and Baxter's ex-wife, the woman who was assaulted at the robbery, were friends and were sailing together in summer of 2008, right when this pattern started. And so Will puts two and two together and says like, hey, when did the kickbacks start? Is that when you decided to have this happen? And again, with 2024 eyes, like it is like this episode I think really tells us a lot that like we did not pay attention to, because when there are still judges getting kickbacks for certain decisions in the world.
And you talk about private prisons, and you talk about in the years since 2008, we've gotten Orange is the New Black, which was really what taught me about private prisons and the corruption within and all the things that go on with that. So seeing that with those eyes is also interesting. And yeah, this was such an interesting case this was a weird turn. I didn't expect this case to go on. It's like, oh, like I thought this was going to be purely something based on race, but it really wasn't. It was even more like, well, not even more sinister, but it was a different kind of sinister.
Yeah, because I was like, first of all, as the first time I was watching this, I was like, what do you mean private prisons? Like, and then I was like, what do you mean you make money off of prisoners? And then I was like, wasn't that slavery? Like, what is happening? Like, I just was like, I don't know how to compute all of this information.
Does not compute. Yeah.
It's too much. And it still is too much sometimes when you think about it. But that's what I really like. If I were going to pick like quintessential episodes of The Good Wife, this one would definitely be on the list, because I think it really showcases what the show's trying to do and what it's trying to say. And I think it does that in a very good way. Before we leave this storyline, I do want to talk about two more things. But one, I do want to mention the mother in the story, Thalia Ramsey, was played by Chicago Med star Marlene Barrett. And so if you are a Chicago Med person and you recognized her, I just wanted to let you know we recognized her too. But she kind of had like the story, like it was kind of hard to watch her. Like she knew what her son was going to be up against going through this ordeal. And then he gets beat up in this prison. So she can't help him. And just having to stand outside is the story that I'm sure, unfortunately, a lot of mothers can relate to. So just wanted to shout out that. But after Will goes to Palgrave Academy and finds out what the story is, he then apparently spends time with Baxter's ex-wife, learns more about the situation and decides to confront Baxter on the street. Like, this is like straight up, I'm waiting on the street for you to pass me so that I can
Yeah.
confront you type of situation. And Baxter doesn't think that Will's serious about this at all. He's just like, well, what is this, an
I
intervention?
mean,
Like, come on, dude.
Will's got his mad face on. He's like, I don't think we never seen Will like this before. She's just got this like stern, like, just like pursed lips look, or like, oh, this is mad Will right here. And Will's just like, and as you said, Max says, oh, what is this intervention? And Will's like, we should have done that a year ago. We might have been in this mess if we had done that. I was like, oh wow, like, it was very interesting to see Mad Will and to see the kind of confrontation that these two friends get into, and when push comes to shove, and you confront a friend about their bad behavior, how the friend lashes back out because Will is on this whole you how dare you do this to these children type of streak here, and Baxter's like, oh, this is so good coming from you
Mm-hmm.
who whores himself out to any low life scum that will pay him. I'm like, and we've had so many people on this show so far tell us how bad Will is, but I feel like we
We
haven't
haven't seen it.
seen it yet. I feel like we should have gotten some bad Will, and then the people talk about how bad Will is. Because right now, I'm just like, what are y'all even talking about? I don't even know this bad Will you speak of. Because all we've seen is the Will who pretty much fights for the right side most of the time. So when people say this, it kind of falls on deaf ears to me in these first 10 episodes. I'm like, when are we going to see this bad Will you all keep talking about? This womanizer, this guy who sometimes works on the bad side of the law, who cuts corners, pulls strings, or whatever. But that was quite a eye-raising confrontation that we got between Baxter and Will.
Yeah, like he's standing on the street shoulder width apart. Like, you are not getting past me. I am
Mm-hmm.
having this conversation with you. Also, we find out in this conversation that this is Baxter's ex-wife.
Yeah, this
So
is the first time we really hear that it's the ex that they have been divorced.
yeah, and so it's
So that
like
was interesting. Yeah.
even more of a jerk. And it ends with Will telling him, like, you're going to jail. Like, this is not the end of this.
You're going,
I'm going to take some action here.
yeah, he like flat out tells him, "You're going to prison, bro," and basically tells him like, "I'm gonna make sure of it. I'm gonna make sure you go to prison because I'm pissed that my friend would do this." I think it's interesting that we didn't get much more after this. We get Terrence and his mom meeting with the Chief Justice. Just like the Chief Justice goes, "Yeah, that's one of my judges, so that's kind of on me too." And she just like shoots Alicia a look of like, "It's your fault. I have to deal with this crap." It was so interesting.
Well,
We don't get much of like what happens to Baxter after
it's
this.
a great example of like the politics of being a judge, because we know what this chief justice thinks behind the scenes. We know that she didn't want to upset the apple cart for this one kid who she is now like touching and
Mm-hmm.
hugging and consoling and talking.
Yeah,
um so we know that where her true thoughts are on the situation, and so she had to like show and save face basically in front of everybody
yeah,
else, and Alicia knows what she thinks as well. So I don't know, it's just, again, quintessential. Like, if I were teaching civics, in which doesn't exist anymore, but if I were, I would use this episode to explain like some issues with the judicial system, because it does a really good job talking about like the nuances here. And again, like, we didn't know about like election of judges. That's not something that's like mentioned in high school. Like, it's just like judges are there and they check, like, we learn about the checks and
yeah,
balances, but we don't understand how people get there. So I thought that was interesting. We Anything else?
yeah. She's very
Go ahead.
No, she's just very a very two faced person, which most of these people in politics in this show are. It's just such an interesting way to see both sides of it. To see in one instance she goes, you can't do this over this one kid, and then to have this scene where she takes that kid and she's like portraying this like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Like, let me go take you on a tour of my office, I guess. Which is like, why would a kid want to do that? But
Yeah,
okay,
it's
whatever.
like, you get a sticker. Like, sorry I almost ruined your
Yeah,
life. Here's a sticker.
Yeah, so it was very nice thing to see, to kind of see both faces of this person who we know what their true feelings are, and we know what she has to portray to the public.
Yes. Well, let's talk a little bit more about this person. We've talked a little bit about the storyline that was happening with Diane throughout this episode. She's being courted to be on a ballot for a judge. We learn a lot about how what it takes to elect a judge in this short little situation. I do want to say that the Chief Justice was played by Meredith Grey's mom. So Meredith or Grey's Anatomy's fans, I wasn't ignoring the status of Meredith Grey's mom until just now. I just was waiting until the point where we talked about her a little bit more. She is quite loved in the Grey's fandom. So, anywho,
Again, not a show that I'm versed in. I just know that I've seen this lady in other places, and she usually plays a villain in most things she's in.
she's a good two-faced, but she basically says, "Hey Diane, we've noticed you're doing great. You should go be a judge. That's the prize, right? Like that's what being a lawyer is all about. Like you want to be a judge and be in the system, and we really need to make sure that we have two judges that understand the law to every one judge that does." And I was like, "What?"
It's like, wow, how standards have fallen. I'm sure, and when we first started this whole judge thing, that all the judges were supposed to understand the law, but now we've just kind of gotten to a point where like, I mean, as long as we're at a good 2-to-1 ratio, we should be okay, right? We should be all right. We should have what most people that understand the law at least, and some that don't. I was like, okay, that's a very cynical way to look at this.
Yeah, and we also learned that like if you want to run Diane, we will make it so you have an uncontested primary. Like you will basically go straight to the general election because we want you to be a judge for us. And I was just like, wait, what? Like this is again peeling back the layers of like how undemocratic our democracy actually is. Like it is not a people's voice situation if people are able to be set up in an uncontested primary because they have agreed to certain things behind the scenes. I mean, some of the things that Diane's being asked to do is first of all divest from her law firm, to not claim her work in terms of working with certain clients, and then of course like to do what the Chief Justice wanted Diane to do with the Baxter case. And so, like, there's a lot of quid pro quos happening before she's even allowed to be a judge. And I think that really makes an impact on Diane.
Yeah, I mean, so many things get picked apart here, even down to Diane's last name. I was like, this sounds like a very English
Yeah.
last name. Like, our Irish voters aren't going to be happy with that. And Adler, Chief Justice, was like, we'll just get a meeting in with the Irish Heritage Association. We'll be all set. I'm like, wow, the amount of scrutiny that gets placed on these people running for judges is very interesting. And I think this is also very eye opening for Diane, because I'm sure that this was probably a goal of Diane at
Oh,
some
yeah.
point to become a judge, and she didn't realize what played into that. I think we can all speak to that by having things that we think we want and then finding out what happens when we actually get those things, and on the journey to those things, and how our minds change, and how the certain nuances of things will change our minds. So I think that was a very relatable thing to look at from Diane. Like, I thought I wanted this thing, but now I'm realizing this might be something that I'm not cut out for, that I don't want to be part of the political machine. I don't want to have to, like you said, not take credit for my work, or lie or manipulate or hide behind the work I do in order to actually get what I think I want. So that was a really like interesting and relatable story from Diane. Like I said earlier, this is Diane's kind of like her coming out party. This is our biggest introduction to who Diane is as a person, and who the Diane I think is very consistent throughout Good Wife
Mm-hmm.
and Good Fight. And more often than not, Diane is going to fight for the right things. There are kind of these little, like, we tilt our head a little bit at Diane sometimes, but most often she's going to fight for the right things, or what she thinks is right at the time.
Yeah, it was really kind of refreshing because I think I've talked about how I didn't remember this version of Diane up until, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, there you are. Because there's even a point in this episode where after Diane has told Will that, hey, I'm thinking of becoming a judge, and and Diane is talking to him about the Baxter case, he's like, you don't even know the kid's name. like, you don't even know
Yeah.
the kid's name. And she doesn't say it right away, but she knows the kid's name and tells Will at the end, like, his name's Terrence.
Well,
Well,
well, I think at that point she didn't know the kid's name. She was just kind of like, you kind of got me, Will. Like, I do care about the kid. I just didn't get his name. And then later she's like, I got the kid's name. His name's Terrence, by the way. I did get the kid's
well,
name
and
because he does call her out, and she's. I mean, we know that Diane cares about the kid.
mhm,
I just don't. I don't think Will, in his like kind of blindness to the situation, because this is one of his friends he's dealing with. I think he throws that out at Diane because he is under the assumption this is all part of a power play by Diane. But he doesn't know that Diane cares about the kid. And Diane was like, like, ooh, like, I'm in a tough spot because I do care about the kid. I just didn't get the kid's name. But, but, and, as Diane talks to Supreme Justice Adler, or whatever her title is, and I think it's interesting because Diane, I think, sees herself in Adler. I think it's kind of crushing to see that Adler,
yeah,
when it comes down to it, is going to just stick with her side of things. As Adler says, you don't go against other judges, like, and just kind of circumvents the law, because Diane does say to her, like, you talk to me about lifeguards and swimmers. This guy isn't a lifeguard. He's going against what the law is. And then Adler's like, well, that's a matter of opinion. Like,
it's
no, not
that.
really. Like, it's kind of fact that that she's not doing the right thing here. And it's interesting how the line blurs between fact and opinion the higher up you go in kind of this like food chain of politics and of whatever society or organization you're in. That was a great kind of uh illustration of that fact.
Yeah. And as you had mentioned before, Alicia bringing this to Diane did have an impact on Diane as well. Not only, her reinvigoration in terms of, caring about people and showing us as the audience who she is, but she ends up getting like the push off from the DNC in terms, I don't think this is the right time for us to be endorsing you. And I love that we saw again real Diane here at the end, because she's like, well, I could still run, right? Like, that's the thing I could do. And she's like, Chief Justice Adler is like, not uncontested. Like, we'll just put someone in better than you. She's like, oh, but it would be fun, right? Like, she's still up for that fight. Like, she still wants to make it happen. So I think, it's definitely not the end of Diane's career ambitions and where she wants to go and what she thinks she can do and the impact she thinks she can make. But I'm glad that she's, not having to conform to the system at this time with the offer that was made for her.
Yeah, I just love how basically Adler comes there. It's like, you cause too much trouble. Like, you want to fight for like the right stuff. Like, you want to be all goody goody. So we're just kind of not gonna deal with you right now. Maybe once you understand how politics really works, maybe we'll come back around and consider you for this. I thought it was really a good twist that it wasn't Diane who dropped out.
Yep.
It was these people that were just like, you might cause some trouble if we get you a judgeship. So we're gonna just kind of go away
Like,
from that. You want to do things too by the book, which I think in their minds probably they were more like a Diane when they entered the judgeship. But then as time goes along, you get more
yep.
corrupted by so on and so forth. It's so interesting to see where like most people probably were when they started and now where they are now.
Yeah, and like what that says for the system itself. Like, maybe it's not set up in the people's best interest, just like maybe. Other than that, the only other thing that happened in this episode was Grace made a new friend. Grace made a new friend, Shannon. Both their dads are in jail. So happy. Like, oh, you can have friends, which is great until Jackie gets involved. This was like the most unhinged Jackie thing that we have seen to date. What are your takes on the
Yeah,
situation?
I this storyline really kind of put me in different directions. At some moments I was rooting for Jackie. At other moments I was rooting for Shannon's mom.
Yeah.
That's the only name we get for her is Shannon's mom. So it was very kind of twisty turny, which is what I kind of love about this show, that these storylines make you take different characters' sides at different moments, seemingly from one minute to the other. So it was a really kind of complex and complicated situation. I loved in the beginning where Grace is asking Alicia if Shannon could come over. She's like, "Oh, and guess what? Her dad's in prison too." And just look on
Hi.
Alicia's face like, "Prison for what?" And I mean, it's such an interesting parallel because we get these comparisons between Peter's situation and Shannon's dad situation, and how are they different and how are they alike?
Yeah, like what jails they're going to, things like that. And it didn't
Mhm.
even like cross my mind, unfortunately, until like later in the episode that like Peter could have had a hand in putting Shannon's dad in jail, like a duh.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that adds another complication for Grace to make friends. You know, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I made a friend, and like our dads are in jail." Like I felt so much for her because she's in a new school at the beginning of the season. Like there's a lot of adjustment, a lot of changes going on in her family, and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, you have a friend." Not so much when Jackie decides to get in the car, drive to Garfield Park, and confront Shannon's mom. I could not. I don't know. I could not. I still have no words. Obviously, Jackie pulls up, sees that there's a hose running, and this is like number one crime on Jackie's mind is like you're wasting water. So she of course has to bring it up. And then I think, she's dealing with the fact that Peter is her son and also in jail. And when Shannon's mom calls her out and says, like, well, your son put my husband in jail, obviously Jackie's going to respond by hosing the lady. Like, I don't know.
Yo, I was so conflicted because I was like, "Yeah, you go get him, Jackie." But at the same time, I was like, I mean, yeah, Jackie's not someone I usually root for, so it was very weird feeling for me. I just love how Jackie always has status at the front of her mind, where she's like, "My son's prison is better than your son's prison,
Yeah.
so we should be worried about you, not the other way around." Like she's like, it's like Jackie's like says on the Forbes list of 100 the best prisons, my son's prison is number 3. Your son's prison is number 15. So actually we are better than you, so you should be looking down on us. Like I loved how it was mostly about status for Jackie and
Oh,
whose
yeah.
prison was better.
Well, there was even a conversation with Alicia where it's like her husband's in jail, and Alicia goes to Jackie, "Your son's in jail." Like,
It's like, yeah, but not in Statesville. Like he's not doing hard time. He's in Club Fed. Like it's not that bad. They can just walk around the campus there at Peter's prison. Shan's dad probably can't do that. So
yeah, and
interesting. So funny.
the status of Jackie is one of the things that every time I see it, I want it to go away. Like it's definitely like a thorn
Mhm.
in my side while I'm watching the series, but it makes for a good character. So I get it. But that's
Yeah.
about it when it comes to
So
this episode. Jason, was there anything we missed? Anything else you want to talk about?
no, I think we got it. I think we're good. It was like one of the I mean, I haven't really found a bad episode of The Good Wife. I just feel like it gets better and better. So this really kind of kept on that track. I thought it was a good study into who Diane is and a good intro to her character. I would say probably like the least amount of Alicia we've gotten in these episodes. Our focus is really on Diane and Will here. So I think that was a really interesting way to go. And I thought it was actually made the show a lot better.
Yeah, it was kind of refreshing to get away from the Peter and Alicia of it all.
Yeah,
And
no
yeah,
Zach, aka Encyclopedia Brown. So I think it was a good break to get from those characters. So I thought it was a great
and
episode.
I also enjoy the focus on the system and talking about like
Yeah,
how it works and how it doesn't work and things like that. It gives me a reason. I got something out of it as a viewer that wasn't just relating to a character or anything like that. It got me to start thinking, like I mentioned before, it's the first time I learned about private prisons, first time, like those things, and those things will change an audience. And I thought that was pretty cool as well. So that's episode 10.
yeah, yeah. That's episode 10. Marissa, do you want to tell the good folks where they can find you, how they can keep up with all the things that you are doing?
Oh, good folks of the Good Pod. Let me tell you, you can find me on Threads and Instagram at It's Me, Marissa G. If I'm doing anything fun and exciting, I will be talking about it there. There's usually a link in my bio, which will tell you the most up to date. But otherwise, I'm really just hanging out here with you, Jason, on the Good Pod. Don't have much else going on at the moment.
Cool. You can find me on Twitter, X, whatever they're calling it nowadays, over at JAYR1085. On the podcast front, I haven't been doing too much. If you like the trash heap of a show called Too Hot to Handle, I did talk about the first drop of that show for this season over on the Rob Has Podcast Network with my good friend Kirsten McInnes. So if you're into that, check that out. Otherwise, this is where you'll find me for the foreseeable future. Unless you have anything
That's it.
else, until next week, stay good.